Hey, it's a me, and I just had a really long conversation with a friend about the movie Us, and had to verbalize kind of the structure that we came up with that was so amazing that not only does this movie have so many like so many references to other things everywhere, like the gloves that the jumpsuit like the shadow versions of people wear are indicative, like they call back to Freddy Krueger, O.J. Simpson, and Michael Jackson, who are all referenced in the movie. But also the character costumes within themselves are so iconic now that it's, as well as the scissors. And not only that, not only all those references and all of the costume design that went into those things, but also the structure of the thematic structure of the conflict that I thought was really interesting. So I wanted to put this down on paper somewhere to to get all my thoughts out about it. And so in the last video I talked about like how the ending is so interesting, but this is more about how in the plot you create these stories that are parallel to each other. I mean, that's the entire point of the movie, is parallelism and duality. But the stories that come out of it are really interesting because the very last, so spoilers ahead, but the very last thing that happens is that we find that Abigail, I think that's her name. Gosh, Lupita Nyong'o's character and her shadow self, Red, switched places at the very beginning of the story. That was the catalyst for the entire movie. The entire conflict of the movie was that there was this underground world that lived for forever. Like, it lived so long that I actually had a moment where I didn't realize the scale of it until the very end, because I was thinking, well, she replaces herself, and how did she survive? How was she even born down there if her parents weren't copies? And then you see that her parents are also copies, and they are, aged. And so this has been going on for at least as long as they've been alive. So this takes, that beginning part is in 1986, and her parents look about 30. So it's at least been around since 66 and even further down. And so that alone, like the idea that there is this underground community, the underground community could be indicative of they give it very brief lip service, but the underground community could be indicative of suppression of the lower class, use of like cocaine and other drugs to keep people that are impoverished still impoverished, as well as in jail and in this prison system. So that's that symbol within itself, and that this is systemic. They even mention that, it's even good that Red doesn't really mention where it started, because she wouldn't know. That no one talks down there. They wouldn't know. They can't tell stories. That's what's so disturbing about it, is that if people can't talk but only make crazy faces, that is really disturbing on a primal level. That if you've ever seen Attack on Titan, the Titans don't speak. They just make really awkward faces and murder people. So that alone is another feature of the movie. And that they only communicate through grunts, and you don't even, we wouldn't even remotely even know how that works. But by them switching places, Red, and I think her name is Abigail, but I'm not completely certain. By them switching places, we see two things happen. It's a symbol of, there's a lot of use of mirrors, and so the use of mirrors and windows and glass and all of those kind of things are indicative of, as well as the symbol of the white rabbit, come from Alice in Wonderland. And that when Alice goes through the looking glass in the second book, she sees this inverse version of the world. And that's exactly what we see, is that Red is actually Alice, and she, like Little Red Riding Hood as well, that there's also a wolf mask in the movie, that's kind of, and she has a red apple, which are storybook elements. And so her going down she's through the looking glass and now trapped there. And so we have all of those symbols for that moment of them switching, is this Alice in Wonderland that is now trapped in this opposite world underground. And then that leads to the two narratives of you have the above ground world, which is kind of keeping up with the Joneses. It's all consumerism, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the title and it says us, but it's also US, like, oh, United States, whoa. So that was Jordan Peele was also working with that like, hey, this entire movie is supposed to be a mirror to you, to the audience, that, hey, we all get caught up in this hedonic treadmill of, I need to buy this, I need to buy that, I need to be better than whoever, just like Gabe, the husband, is competing with I don't remember his name, but competing with his counterpart, who's played by Tim Heidecker. And with that, they're all competing, and that's like in their minds. But now that we've seen that Red and Abigail they switched at the very beginning of the movie, that the entire time, the narrative that's created for Abigail is that she started from that systemic world. Like, let's say that, and this is something that happens, some people have a phobia of, that they might be in a rough situation. They might be poor or working through some sort of hardship, kind of like in Good Will Hunting, where the main character is really smart, smarter than a lot of people around him. And by going out and making money and becoming successful outside of that ecosystem, they might feel like they're abandoning it. They're abandoning people that they grew up with, abandoning everything that they had. And that's exactly what Abigail does. She comes up from that entire system and leaves it all behind. But when you recontextualize the entire movie with that, you see that she actually has been, when you recontextualize the entire movie, you realize that she has been slow in the back of her mind, potentially thinking about that, thinking of the people that she left behind, and maybe not even regretting for an instant that she did that, but also understanding that, like, we're doing this up here and they have to deal with the consequences of that down there, and all of that, as well as we see that the shadow versions of people come up and then they try to claim the lives that they never had, and when they do that, they are also keeping up with the Joneses. The counterpart family, the wife puts on makeup. Tim Heidecker's character puts on a robe. Like, he's slinking into that same position where Tim Heidecker's character, like on the surface world, he is a bully in this ecosystem. He's a bully when it comes to buying things, like keeping up with the Joneses things. He always has something that Gabe wants, but the same thing happens when the shadow version comes up, is he is also a bully. He does the kind of like hand, like whoops thing, which is indicative of bullying, even if it isn't in a, overtly, antagonistic way. And that it shows that they have that these versions, the shadow versions, are your like primal self. Imagine if there's a version of you that anytime something physically taxing happened, you were doing something that was physically hard, instead of abandoning it, there's a version of you that got really, really good at that. If you're thinking of D&D, it's like if you took all of your stats, and instead of putting them in charisma, you put them in dexterity and athleticism. Then every single thing, how well you speak, how well you do things, that is thrown away, and all of that power is put into your physicality. And that's what makes these versions of us so terrifying. So you have that. You have the above ground world that is keeping up with the Joneses. It's also about like living life based on other people and consumerism, the US. Then you have the below ground version. And when Abigail and Red trade places, by doing that, you have Plato's allegory of the cave. For people that don't know what that is, Plato postulated that if this world that we live in, we're all in a cave, and there's the sun that is leaking through, shining through the cave, and we are all chained facing one way, facing a wall. And all we can see is the shadows that are projected of us, of items, of other things that are projected from the sun. And that's all we see. And then you have one person that can actually go outside and see the sun. They're blinded by that light, and now they actually see objects for what they are, and they come back and they try to show that to other people. Plato said that that's what a philosopher is someone that sees things for what they actually are and then tries to explain it to other people. And either they are met with acceptance and change, or with denial and some sort of retribution. But in this case, Red is actually the philosopher in this allegory of the cave. She comes down. She actually has seen the sun. Literally, she mentions it, and she shows these shadow versions, which she even says there's a shadow. So directly calling to Plato's allegory of the cave, and she shows all of them what there is, and they have no reason to do anything but accept her. And then they start plotting. They start coming up with this thing. They are accepting her, the naked leading the blind, and allowing for them to go back up into the world. And then they have the rebellion. And then this is what I love, because I don't think there's a better example of this, or a more, I guess, literal example of this in any media, which is the playing of chess. That there is no other movie I can think of where the pieces on a chessboard are so perfectly exemplified in the fact that maybe not in their movements, maybe not in the fact of what the pieces actually do on the board, but the fact that there's literally a light and a dark side of each character. And that the king character is Abigail in red, and then they have the queen character that is oh my god, I didn't even think about this. That the king character of Gabe, he is crippled, and he can only move so slowly, like the king on a chessboard. And the queen character is one of the more mobile pieces, and she can move in any direction. She's more nimble and smart than the other characters. And then you have the horse and the bishop, which I would argue is the son and the daughter. And then we have the castle. I don't really know about that one, but I mean, that's what I mean, is that we can have, like, you could argue that the castle is actually the daughter because she can run really, really fast. You can argue that the bishop is the son moving in sharp, angled ways, or even the horse. But that's what I mean, is that, like, I would probably say that's closer to the bishop, because the bishop's on the right-hand side of the queen, as well as the king. So maybe that way. But what I mean is just the fact that there is an exact copy of each character on each side. So it's this symbol is so rich. It makes so much sense in this context. And what I really love about it is the fact that they do play chess with each other, or at least Red is playing chess. That, like, Abigail has been thrust into this. She doesn't really know, like, what this, that she's even playing this game, but she has in the back of her mind been preparing for it, because she knows that this could eventually happen. And when she says that there are coincidences that are lining up, she is seeing that when they're on the beach, they're walking down the beach, and you can see their shadows perfectly. In the middle of the day at the beach, the sun is high in the sky, and your shadows are very small. But when they go, it's probably closer to, I don't know, 7 or 8 a.m., like right when the sun's coming out, and you can see their shadows perfectly from the angle that they show, from the aerial angle. And so that shows that their shadows are creeping up on them, as well as a frisbee is thrown and falls on a dot, showing that the frisbee's shadow on the beach towel. And so now we have them clashing, and we have chess moves that do happen, like Red sacrifices her son in what she gives, even the son Jason mentions that he says it's a trap. And so by trying to conquer that trap, saying, like, okay, I see your first move, I'll rival it by trying to kill Jason's alternate self, which is Pluto. He kills Pluto by making him walk backwards into the fire, but by doing so, then puts himself in another position. So that part alone is indicative of a chess move, that they are giving up pieces to get other pieces to further the agenda. And that was a symbol that I love, that, like, you take these two different worlds that are, you know, they have a momentum that is started when the switch is made between Abigail and Red, when they switch at the very beginning of the movie in 1986, that they switch, and then that causes this hedonic treadmill for Abigail, that she is now trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to live a successful life and escape her roots of being a disenfranchised person, trying to let go of all that. And we can also see that because Gabe is trying to keep up with the Joneses, but he also is wearing more erudite clothing, he's speaking well, and he only uses any type of rough language when he's trying to use racial coding. He's trying to talk down and use a deeper, more aggressive voice when the family first shows up, and he takes that baseball bat out. And that within itself is a weapon. He's trying to use his voice as a weapon to say, hey, you might not believe that I am, like, I look erudite, but I can still play this role of where I came from. And So you see that. You see all of that plot of them trying to escape their past and escape where they came from to live in this new world of being erudite, being successful monetarily. And they're always talking about like maybe getting a surgery or maybe buying this thing or that thing, all those kind of things. When that is their life. And then they also have the Plato's allegory of the cave life that's underneath them of causing a revolution to happen with symbolic things like the glove that Red might remember from when she was a kid from Michael Jackson, as well as she was wearing that Thriller t-shirt, indicative of Michael Jackson. And then also that the red on the jumpsuit showing they're all of one kind, like all of these shadow creatures, all of these shadow versions of people are all the same. They all eat, also another like little tidbit is that they all were eating rabbit. Rabbits, they replicate pretty easily. Some people might think they're like clones, you know, they have so many children, but also apparently eating rabbit meat causes you to go insane. It's so, like the brain needs fat, a lot of fat. To make sure that's keeping up the fat that is your brain. And so you need to feed it that. But rabbit meat is so lean that you might lose track of that. And if you eat only rabbit meat, the leanness of it, the protein, will strip your brain of the fat and your brain might shrivel. Like it might become less useful. And that goes with the grunting. And so now we have this Plato's allegory of the cave underground that is starting this revolution that then meets a head in this game of chess, where they literally sit down at a coffee table and line up the pieces. Literally, they have all of both sides of the family sit down parallel from each other, and then they start the game. And I love that it's so poetic. The entire movie is so poetic in that way. And that ultimately leads to this entire chess game that they eliminate pieces. They all meet up they meet at the very end to have the final showdown, which is basically a boss battle. And Abigail even moves, like kind of primal, which shows that they are very similar, more or less, that one of them came from wealth, and then had to go down and become a kind of a monstrous creature, while the other one came from nothing and then became wealthy. And that at the very end, when they fight, when they have their climactic battle, that Red is so her movements are so perfect, like a ballerina that Abigail had abandoned long ago when she was 14. And that those movements are kind of indicative of a queen, that they move so like without being harangued by like a horse moves in an L shape. They don't have to. They can move however they want. And she is physically more adept at movement than Abigail is, and Abigail has to overcome that, as well as her weapon I love is a fire stoker, a fire stick kind of thing, and that you use that to stoke the fire. And when she first made that decision to switch places and break Red's voice box, that she was stoking the flame of this revolution. And we also see that in other weapons, like the daughter, she uses a golf club, as well as the husband uses a baseball bat. Both of them are indicative of like the kind of erudite white sports that aren't like they are the kind of traditional thing, and that they're trying to blend in, and they're also weaponizing that to fight this counterculture that is nothing but disenfranchised, impoverished. And it's so interesting to watch that, because what I love is just this symbolism of Abigail having abandoned all of this culture, everything that she knew when she was young, to become successful. And that is something that a lot of people kind of wrestle with, is abandoning people to move forward in the world, and if that's the right decision. And in this movie, we also have that moral quandary. Was it the right decision for her to change that? If she didn't do it, then all these people wouldn't have died. That system would have stayed the same until maybe they all died out. And the above ground world would have kept going exactly how it was going as well. But by changing that, by going against the status quo, she starts this cataclysmic event, this apocalypse that kills so many people and creates this image of the Hands Across America, which is calling back, of course, to the Hands Across America 1986 movement, which was kind of a dramatic failure, that they tried to raise so much money and they ended up hitting it. They hit 30 million, but a very small fraction of that went to the actually impoverished people. And that is a perfect symbol of, like, this movie is fighting against that to combat that, to actually help people that are impoverished, you might just need to give up what you have. You might need to give up more than you're willing to give up to help that group. But also something that I love, and it's so ambiguous, that, like, that's what Red does at the end. She's like, no, there can only be one, either one group or the other. But something that my friend brought up today, that when we were talking, is that she even mentions at the very end, and it messes with me thinking about this, that she says, you could have taken me with you. That's what you could have done. We could have both gone together and lived a life, but you decided that there could only be one, and now I have to fulfill that. Now I have to have revenge and show you what that means, that there can only be one above and below. And so I will have all of these people use these scissors to tether the relationships to, and the scissors within themselves they're a mirror image, that are put together. They are a mirror image of each other, like knives that are held at one point. They are tethered together by one point. And also that, scissors within themselves are used to cut things. And apparently, in Greek mythology, they were used to cut, your mortal thread and kill you. And so, that's what she's doing, that's what Red's doing, is causing this revolution, causing people to reclaim their lives. And it's so good that by that one decision, that, I mean, and to take an entire revolution and all of that and put all of that on the decision that one 5 to 10-year-old, it's kind of ambiguous how old she is, but put it on that person's shoulders when they're really young, and trying to do something for their own good, getting out of a bad situation. And it's fantastic. That is the crux of the entire conflict, is one decision one person makes when they're very young. And we don't even find that out, and we're left to ponder that decision after the movie's over. We don't see that until about a minute away from the ending credits. And it's fantastic. And another thing to look into if you want to, my friend was telling me today that all of the characters' names are actually like inverses of each other. That Gabe, the husband's parallel, his name is Abraham, and apparently Gabriel was the messenger who told Abraham that he's having a child. So Gabe in the movie, he impregnates Lupita Nyong'o's Abigail character, and then that forces Abraham and Red to have a child. So that's kind of him. He is the kind of reluctant messenger without even realizing it, himself, Gabe. And then there are other characters that they have counter names, like Red and Abigail, not as much, but it's just so interesting, this entire movie, and I could talk about it for hours, and I will spare you that. So I just really quick wanted to talk about the conflicts in the movie and how they all are based on really interesting like mythologies. Like we have the Keeping Up with the Joneses above ground, and then we have Plato's allegory of the cave below ground, and then that culminates in a game of chess. And so, yeah, thank you so much for listening, and have a good one.